Welcome to Gospel Perspectives on World History, and I'm your host, Michael Stone. Thank you for joining us as we begin looking at the secular history of the world through the lens of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. While this podcast is primarily geared towards members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, anyone who has an interest in topics of faith and history are welcome to join us. And as an important legal notice, while I do intend to center what I share as much as possible on the verified details of the historical record and on ancient and modern scripture approved by the Church, I do want to stress that the views I share here do not necessarily represent official doctrine, policy, or the views of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that I take full responsibility for the content and programming of this podcast. So, last time, we had introduced Persia, but there is one aspect of ancient Persia that deserves its own dedicated episode, as it concerns one of the earliest religions in the world that still claims a number of followers to the present day, reputed not only for its exceptionally tolerant history, but also for the many parallels it shares with the fullness of the gospel. Today, we will discuss Zoroastrianism. At first, I feel I should clearly explain why I feel compelled to focus on other religions besides my own. My purpose is most definitely not to disprove or debate other people's genuinely held beliefs. There are too many voices in the world who are committed to tearing other belief systems down, rather than taking the time to appreciate the inherent beauty of these people's sincere faiths. Yes, I do sincerely believe that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has the fullness of the truth of the gospel, inasmuch as we alone have not only an accurate understanding of all the basics for God's plan for us, but also the singular and only real priesthood authority to administer in the saving ordinances thereof. But none of that means that the church has a monopoly on truth or on worthwhile, valuable perspectives on moral living, or that God does not also act through other religious organizations or traditions to bless the lives of his children on this earth. Consider, for example, what Elder Orson F. Whitney, an apostle, said of this matter in 1921. And I quote, "God is using not only his covenant people, but other peoples as well, to consummate a work stupendous, magnificent, and altogether too arduous for this little handful of saints to accomplish by and of themselves. All down the ages, men bearing the authority of the holy priesthood, patriarchs, prophets, apostles, and others, have officiated in the name of the Lord, doing the things that he required of them. And outside the pale of their activities, other good and great men, not bearing the priesthood, but possessing a profundity of thought, great wisdom, and a desire to uplift their fellows, have been sent by the Almighty into many nations to give them not the fullness of the gospel, but that portion of the truth that they were able to receive and wisely use." End quote. Hence, my own personal belief is that we do ourselves a great disservice by not learning of other faiths in the world. It has been my experience that in doing so, I have not seen my own testimony of the Book of Mormon or of the divinely appointed mission of Joseph Smith weaken. I know Jesus is the Christ, and he is the center of my faith. What I have enjoyed in learning about other religions is reveling in the fact that we as Latter-day Saints are not alone. And what I mean by that is that we're not the only people in the world who care about morality or who want to do good, to live righteously. Roger R. Keller from the BYU Religious Studies Center explains better than I can this sentiment, and I quote him. "Suppose that the only truly moral spiritual persons in the world were 14 million Latter-day Saints. What would this world be like? It would be a terrible place to live. Thank heaven for all of our brothers and sisters who have moral and spiritual values given to them by God and who make it possible for all of us to live above the level of a hunted animal. Thank heaven for my Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Sikh, all the other religious persons I haven't yet mentioned. By the spiritual values they hold, they make the world habitable. We do not have to live in terror, for there are others like us who seek to do God's will. Close quote. Studying other religions of the world in this sense is not about learning who is right and who is wrong. It's about being true to who we really should be as Latter-day Saints, a people who honestly believe and live according to our articles of faith, including what should be our natural desire to seek after those things which are virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. So, with that being said, let's focus on Zoroastrianism. The exact date of origin for this religion is not known to us, given the scarcity of records from this time. Tradition holds that Zoroaster, or Zarathustra in the original ancient Persian, founded this religion after having received a divine vision, while he was undergoing a purification rite at age 30. Now, fun fact here that isn't always pointed out. A number of the world's greatest religions in history come to share that parallel, because it isn't just also Christ who began his ministry at age 30, but Siddhartha Gautama, the first Buddha, also began teaching at that age, as did Confucius in China. But this simple bit of trivia is far from the only parallel between this and other religions that we'll see as we continue. So anyway, Zoroaster was unique among religious teachers of his time, as in his region, Judaism was the distinctly minority belief system, as no commission to spread the gospel to the nations of the Gentiles had been given. And yet, Zoroaster came to introduce distinctly monotheistic ideas in a very polytheistic world. Zoroaster acknowledges the presence of other gods and deities in his belief system, but taught his followers to reserve their worship primarily for one supreme being called Ahura Mazda, or Wise Lord in ancient Persian. And to those of you whose ears started ringing, yes, Japan does in the 1900s come to name a make of cars after this deity, in the hopes that having their cars reference this god of light would enhance their brand's image. Of perhaps even greater interest to us as Latter-day Saints, however, it isn't just that Zoroaster encouraged such monotheistic ideals, but also is one of the very few founders of the great religions in history who acknowledged that God has an adversary. In Zoroastrianism, this adversary is known as Angra Mainyu, who leads several other dark spirits to try to tempt mortals to evil. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But the parallels don't end there. Zoroaster also taught that Ahura Mazda created the first couple, Mashya and Mashineng, who lived in a paradisical state with all living things, until they were deceived by Angra Mainyu, who tricked them into accepting him as their creator and lord instead. For their transgression, they were evicted from paradise and sentenced to live out their lives in a world of tribulation and toil. In this new fallen state, they and their descendants were given the chance to still live wholesome lives and choose to follow Mazda's ways over Angra's. Now, many scholars at this point will claim that Zoroaster's ideas here came to be the source of inspiration for much of Jewish and hence Christian and Islamic theology. Latter-day Saints, however, know very well that these truths, these transcendent truths of the creation and fall, it began not with Zoroaster, but from prophets and teachers of an even more ancient origin. We are taught that there have been many dispensations of the gospel over the ages, and the full history of these dispensations and their eventual apostasies are not fully known to us. I'm not aware of any records or evidence showing that Zoroaster derived these ideas from any authorized ministers of the gospel during his time, but we have seen how in the case of the Egyptians that certain gospel truths and traditions, it can be carried on through the generations even after the rights to the priesthood have been rescinded. It would not be unusual for Zoroaster to have been influenced by some of these passed down traditions. How Zoroaster received these ideas, of course, is not the major point here. What we can definitely agree on is that much of what he taught did, in fact, in one way or another, originate from God. But I am getting a little ahead of myself. There is even more that Zoroastrianism has in common with Christianity. Zoroaster also taught that while God had an enemy, that their conflict would not be endless, but would one day result in Ahura Mazda's final triumph over Angra. There would at that time also be a day of judgment for all humanity. In addition to this day of judgment, there is also a judgment that comes to a soul when one dies. A spirit in Zoroastrian thought is believed to depart the body only after 3 days from the time of death. A dog is usually brought in to guard the corpse during this intermediary period in order to ensure no evil spirits interfere during this time. And anciently, though not common in modern times, the body was also given what is called a sky burial, where the corpse would be brought into a tower of sorts and left exposed to the birds to pick clean. Only after the bones were all that was left would the remains then be allowed to be buried. So when a spirit does leave its body, it arrives in the afterlife, greeted by 2 guardian dogs. These dogs will welcome a moral soul and rebuke an evil one. At this point, a maiden spirit called Dana approaches the recently deceased, either in the form of a youthful, beautiful woman, if the soul is just, or a withered old hag if the soul isn't. In either case, Dana helps guard the soul against attack from an evil angel named Sarush, as she leads the newly departed across a bridge to their final destination, the angel Rashnu. Rashnu judges the deceased, and if they are found to be good, they are welcomed into the paradise of the House of Song. If they are found to be wicked, they are cast from the bridge into the House of Lies, where the iniquitous there are tormented in darkness, and regardless of how many people may suffer alongside them, a curse of loneliness permeates their every moment. But for those who are somewhere in between, Rashnu instead sends them to a place called Hamastakan, where souls instead wait there for the end of time, when they will eventually be resurrected and then reunited with Ahura Mazda. But wait, there's even more. Not only does Zoroastrianism teach of multiple eternal destinations after death, but even within each of these destinations, there are varying degrees or levels of either paradise or torment. Ultimately, Zoroaster also taught that Ahura Mazda is a god of mercy. He taught that even the souls in the lowest level of the House of Lies are believed to one day be afforded the chance to graduate up, to be reunited with Ahura Mazda. This redemption is believed to be accomplished primarily through the instrumentation of a Messiah, called Saoshyant, or the one who brings benefit, who will invoke the end of time and reunite each lost soul with Ahura Mazda. Hopefully, after hearing all that, it is evident that even despite some of the smaller differences between Latter-day Saint and Zoroastrian theology, there is far more that we have in common that deserves to be celebrated. For we too, in the church, rely on the belief of a Messiah who has, since the time of Zoroaster, come into the world. The Heavenly Father is a merciful God who allows the freedom of choice to all who come into the world to live as they will according to the light that they receive. And to even the most depraved of sinners, there is still a way forward, and there is still a redemption possible, even if they are now suffering in what Latter-day Saints term as a spirit prison, which can very fittingly be described as a house of lies in the Zoroastrian sense. Unfortunately, there is another very frustrating parallel Zoroastrianism has with many other world religions. And I say unfortunately as I wish this wasn't the case. But as is the case with Christianity, Confucianism, and Buddhism, Zoroastrianism's founder did not write anything down. And we are reliant wholly on the records of those who came several years after the original founder's death. But from those later records and the traditions that have survived the millennia, it is clear that Zoroaster's message and teachings transcend what a normal 30-year-old could possibly have conceived on his own. Now, Zoroastrian religion does persist to this day, but that is in spite of centuries of repression from Christian and Muslim influences. It is just tragic to note that this repression of this beautiful faith happened, especially in light of the uniquely tolerant nature of what they believed, because for it is no accident that Cyrus the Great was as kind and open-minded and as fair as he was to the Jews and other cultures in his empire. He was a practicing, devout Zoroastrian. Where once Zoroastrianism was the commanding worldview in one of history's largest empires, its followers today unfortunately only number in the hundreds of thousands, again, primarily due to centuries of undue suppression and persecution. And that is another key lesson that I think the history of Zoroastrianism has for us. How careful we have got to be in how we interact with those of other faiths or belief systems which are different from our own. It is nothing short of a miracle that Zoroastrianism has survived the ages. Had the followers of Zoroastrianism been a little less faithful, or their neighbors a little more intolerant, the world would today be short several thousands of people who believe in the principles of free agency, who believe that there is a merciful, loving God, and who cherish religious freedom and pluralism. The world would do well to learn, I would argue, from Zoroastrianism, to cherish religious freedom as they do. And as for what they have to say of moral living, I believe that their four chief principles of moral living can be deeply appreciated by anyone, and not just Latter-day Saints, for their inherent worth to a conscientious person. And I do want to focus in on these just because of how needed I think they are for the modern world today. The first of these is the first principle of a moral Zoroastrian life is to tell the truth at all times, especially in keeping promises. The significance of just how vital honesty is to Zoroastrian religion is underlined by their name for hell. It's the house of lies for a reason. Unfortunately, as is especially the case in modern Western culture, I feel, lying is commonly accepted as a normal practice in personal relationships, so-called civil discourse, professional dealings, and every other major facet of life. Clearly, the modern world could do with a more Zoroastrian emphasis on honesty. The second key principle of a moral Zoroastrian life is to practice charity to all, especially to those less fortunate. With our society seeing an ever-widening extreme gap between the haves and the have-nots, the need for service and charity from those who do have the ability to help has never been more important or more needed. I know that the issue of how to help the poor, the unemployed, or the otherwise unfortunate often gets politicized, one way or another. But the Savior made it clear that our task as Latter-day Saints is to just serve. Mosiah chapter 4 in the Book of Mormon is very stark in its warning that we are not to judge the poor. We don't run faster than we have strength, but that doesn't mean we can't give where we are able. Brigham Young definitely said it much better than I can, and I'll just quote him here. Suppose that in this community there are 10 beggars who beg from door to door for something to eat, and that 9 of them are impostors who beg to escape work, and with an evil heart practice imposition upon the generous and sympathetic, and that only 1 of the 10 who visit your doors is worthy of your bounty. Which is best? To give food to the 10 to make sure of helping the truly needing one, or to repulse the 10 because you do not know which is the worthy one? You will all say, administer the charitable gifts to the 10, rather than turn away the only truly worthy and truly needy person among them. If you do this, it will make no difference in your blessings, whether you administer to worthy or unworthy persons, inasmuch as you give alms with a single eye to assist the truly needy. Close quote there. And so, yeah, I'm not going to get into the issue of the role of government in this. Really, the real heart of the issue here is what is in our hearts. We give as individuals where we can and where we are able, because hopefully we care about our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate than we are. Anyway, moving on. Third principle for moral living, as according to Zoroastrianism: showing love for others, even if they do not return the sentiment. Again, 100% agree with this, and hope that I can try to do better at it. Christ taught that very same principle when he said, "For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same?" And really, anyone can be friendly and loving to those people who are friendly and loving towards them. The real challenge that Christ and Zoroaster asks us to live up to is to treat those who are ultimately children of God just like we are, just like how we would want to be treated. The fourth one, I'll admit, is the one that I've been needing the most work on for the past while, maybe. Zoroaster's fourth principle of moral living is moderation in all things, especially in diet. And I've been fairly good this past year, though recently those day-old donut deals in the grocery store have been creeping up on me. Extremism, whether in eating habits, fulfilling our callings, providing for our families, or whatever other aspect of life we may be tempted to do all or to do nothing, either extreme can be spiritually destructive. And with that last principle, that will conclude the major list of things I wanted to highlight with Zoroastrianism. Now, there's, of course, a lot more that could be said about this religion than I could ever possibly have time to share in a podcast episode. For the time being, however, we will end our discussion on Zoroastrianism and return back to Egypt and play a little bit of a catch-up history with them. And we'll look at some of the most memorable and also more controversial pharaohs, arguably, who ruled after the Bronze Age collapse that ended the Hittite Empire. Also, if you have enjoyed this podcast, be sure to leave us a review. And if you know others who would enjoy this series, please consider sharing it with them. One easy way to do that is to use the link in this episode description for our show's website and share that on your ward's social media page so that other members of the church can enjoy the show as well. I would like to thank everyone who has supported the launch of this podcast, including my lovely wife, my kids, and my loving brother-in-law Spencer for suggesting that I go through with this idea. And again, thank you for listening, and stay safe out there.